Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's seminar. I'm Nancy Holm, for those who haven't been here before for one of our talks. I'm the assistant director here and seminar organizer, along with Beth Lieber, who's manning the IT portion today. And I'd like to remind everyone to please turn off or put on vibrate their cell phones. And then I'll also want to request that we save all of the questions to the end of the seminar, and then we'll come around with the microphone to ask those. And then for those viewing online, I'd also mention that you can type in questions to us, but we'll answer those at the end of the seminar. The seminar is going to be archived and available on our website next week. And so we have all of the ones from the past 7 years actually archived on our website if you want to go back and look at any of the sustainability seminars there. And the schedule for the upcoming seminars is out on the table here, and then also for those online, you can find that on our website. And I did want to mention that we have an additional seminar that's related to waste coming up on October 24th, the Brazilian Waste Panorama. And we have some two guests from Brazil will be presenting that at that time. So that information will be also up on our website. So with that, I'd like to say we're very pleased today to have with us Anita Kedia. She is from the Waste Management Sustainability Services out of their Chicago office. She is their Senior Business Development Manager with over 10 years of experience in real estate development and sustainable business management solutions. She's a member of the U.S. Green Building Council, Women in Green, and the International Council of Shopping Centers. Since joining Waste Management in 2009, Anita helped launch the Midwest office for Waste Management Sustainability Services, which is focusing on developing zero waste strategies, sustainable supply chains, and environmentally efficient programs for numerous Fortune 500 companies. Her previous work experience included developing LEED certified retail complexes, consulting on green building solutions, and also creating energy management strategies for commercial properties. Anita is LEED accredited professional. She's got Lean Six Sigma Green Belt, and she's fluent in Spanish and Hindi. In 2012, she served on the prestigious Department of Homeland Security Advisory Council Sustainability and Efficiency Task Force, reporting to Secretary Janet Napolitano at that time. So with that, I'd like to present Anita Kedia, who will be giving us a talk today on her work with Waste Management Sustainability Services. Here, I'll give you this.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for the invitation to speak with you all. And I know that I'm speaking to quite a few sustainability experts in the room as well. So, yeah, I'm very humbled to be here. A little bit about myself, other than the bio that was described to you. My division with Waste Management is Sustainability Services, and we're a consulting division within the company providing different types of solutions around waste and sustainability strategy for our customers. I've been with the company for 5 years, and my talk today is very broad. It's trends in waste and resource management, so it's a pretty broad topic. And I think that it's a timely one, though, because we are seeing a bit of a shift in the mindset of customers and businesses in terms of waste, which kind of, let's see, how do I, is this the clicker? Okay. Oh, there we go. So why now? Why is waste such a big topic these days? When I started with waste management, I came from the energy world, and that was the big sustainability buzzword. Everybody was looking at retrofitting, retro-commissioning, how to become more energy efficient, really looking at some of the low-hanging fruit for their operations and cost efficiencies. And now it seems to be that there's a lot more dialogue around resources and waste and looking at different ways and business models of doing things. And so in that respect, I kind of wanted to give an overview of why are we here and where are we now. So our traditional linear model of production and consumption has really kind of created this cradle to grave process that has been in place since Industrial Revolution. So we're typically mining and extracting natural resources and then manufacturing products from those resources, transporting them either to a retailer or to consumers, and then the consumer is consuming them and using them up, and then eventually they do end up at end of life, which those resources then are just discarded and they go away, if you will. So why are we at this point? Well, we are starting to realize that there are some pressures, right? We've been consuming and using and taking from and not really giving back as much. So therefore, we're facing some real problems. We need more stuff. And we have finite resources. So we have finite resources that we've been using, petroleum and fossil fuels, metals. We're also depleting our renewable resources through aquifers, through pollution, deforestation, overfishing, erosion, or arable soil loss. And then there's also some socio-political pressures right now. We have a growing middle class across the world that are really putting pressures on being able to acquire new things, being able to produce more. And those societal pressures are really starting to have an impact in terms of how purchasing and consumer demand is growing. So if you look at just sort of the trends, Asia Pacific by the year 2030 is going to reach 6 times the amount of consumption and purchasing capability than North America would, which is quite a huge significant jump. And companies are really starting to look at this impact and saying, how do we manage and how do we plan so that we're able to provide consumers with goods and be able to be profitable, but at the same time really take a look at how we're utilizing resources and then how we're bringing them back into the supply chain because of the scarcity that we are facing and going to face. Along with that pressure, we're also having a population increase. So we will need more resources going forward, not just for consumer demand and a growing middle class, but then just for necessary, basic, everyday life. We need more energy, we'll need more water, and we'll need more food. So all of those impacts on our global supply chain, on our resources, are also threatened by climate change. So the availability and the security of being able to obtain and continuously obtain those resources then are also compromised by an unstable climate and unstable capacity to be able to actually obtain those resources. So, all of this is very doom and gloom, and here we are, and we've kind of reached this arc. And so, where are businesses now? Where are we today, and what are businesses really starting to look at in terms of their resource impact and how resource scarcity is impacting their way of business? Resource costs are escalating, and we've seen that over the course of the past 10 years. Specifically, there has been a lot of interaction between businesses and understanding supply chain management, retailers understanding how resources and limited resources are impacting their supply chain. So manufacturers, retailers, suppliers are all really starting to come to the table to have dialogue around how to be more efficient and more effective. Companies really are worried about the cost, the scarcity, and then also the threats to human health with certain supply chain issues. So there's also this consumer pressure, and consumers are really looking for a lot more transparency, not only around the types of products that they're utilizing, but then also how are those products made, and then how are they going to dispose of those products. So all of this kind of has sort of this resource impact on the waste stream. How are we obtaining materials? How are we utilizing materials? How are we discarding materials? And then ultimately, what happens with those materials to bring them back into our supply chain? And that's really where I think we're at this precipice today, and really looking at that trend with American businesses, global supply chains, and how they're all kind of tying into one another and really trying to have a lot more dialogue around how these impacts are affecting them and the consumer. So if we look at sort of, these business impacts, we have sort of the business eco model as it stands today. So where we take and we extract natural resources, we do the consumption from that point to be able to manufacture a processed good. But in that process of manufacturing, there's a byproduct that a business would probably pay for in terms of their manufacturing waste to discard. But there are also other impacts. There's energy impacts. There's water impacts that are non-product outputs during this manufacturing process. They provide a good, and that good is then used as transportation. So there's another byproduct there that is out into the waste stream. And then ultimately the consumer uses that product, and then that product then goes back into an end-of-life chain where it's not being recirculated or reused in a most optimal way. Right? That's our current situation, our current impact with resource utilization. And so we're looking at now, how do we change this? How do we make this a little bit more effective? How do we make it more efficient? And the first way, I think, is for us to understand what exactly are we discarding? What is in our waste stream? What are we considering waste? And so this pie chart has a pretty interesting picture, an interesting story to tell, in that our waste stream is food waste, it's recyclable paper, it's recyclable plastic, it's construction and demolition waste. And then there's a small portion that's considered other or non-recyclable or non-reusable. That other category is only 15% of our current waste stream. So where are there solutions? Where are there sort of trends to be able to reutilize and reuse some of these opportunities, or these waste streams that we are right now not really receiving any sort of beneficial reuse or higher value for those materials? The waste industry is shifting, and the waste industry is shifting in a way that really is encouraging material reuse and material resources. The landfill volume over the past 5 years, now 7 years, has really started to decrease. And the decrease of landfill volume really indicates how we're shifting our material use. So, and then our end-of-life methodology. So recycling is up, landfill volume is down. But our cost for managing those materials at landfill is still rising. So between land use and not being able to continue to use land as a landfill option, and then also the operational cost of operating landfills continues, the landfill cost or landfill volume that's being driven down isn't really changing the operating cost of using a landfill. So the cost of operating a landfill is still staying and remaining the same, but the volume isn't being driven to keep that cost down. So our cost for operating those landfills and those tipping fees are actually going up. So it's really driving businesses to understand and municipalities to understand that they cannot continue in this vein. It's unsustainable from an economic perspective as well. So our current system right now, we have material recovery facilities that were built in the 70s and the 80s. And originally, that waste stream mix was very heavy in paper and limited in rigid plastics and those types of materials that we see today. So our MRFs at the time were really built to process 70 to 80% fiber and about 20 to 35% plastic or rigid plastic containers. That shift is starting to change, right? So we're seeing less paper, we're seeing more plastics, we're seeing a variety of different plastics in different formats. And our MRFs aren't necessarily designed at this time, our older MRFs are not necessarily designed to really manage that kind of material and really capture it most effectively. So, another kind of little twist in the operations of a materials recovery facility has really been around the green fence change so that we cannot send sort of contaminated plastics abroad. So the market for plastics has also changed. And so therefore, our processing technology, our processing capability really has to start to match what the global demand is, as well as what we're seeing from the marketplace coming towards us. So that material management piece is really starting to become more of an issue, and it's something that's driving both the consumer, the waste industry, and businesses, and how they're actually bringing product or packaging to the marketplace. So within that plastics evolution, as we're talking about material management, we are seeing, as I mentioned, different types of plastics, different iterations of plastics in the waste stream. And some of these materials are more difficult for us to capture and then be able to process. What really makes material recyclable is the ability to have a market available to process that material itself. So there's an end buyer for it. There are technologies, as you're exploring currently here at the center, to be able to manage some of those materials more effectively and bring them up the value chain. But from a national footprint perspective, and for us to be able to have a scalable solution, there has to be a marriage between design, material, and collection, and then processing. So that really has to be sort of a synergistic process, and everybody has to have a seat at the table to understand what really makes sense. So that being said, currently plastic volume is increasing, and different iterations of plastics are increasing. But we really need to have a dialogue, an open dialogue, about what impact those different types of materials have on the waste stream. So what does make something recyclable? And how is that particular package or product really received within the industrial commercial recycling network? So we can, the collection has to be easy, for the consumer. So curbside recycling has changed, whereas, in the past you used to segregate all your different recyclable materials. There was plastics in one bin, paper in another, aluminum, tin, colored glass, and so forth. You had to segregate it. We've changed that to make it much more easy for the consumer, and have implemented single stream in many municipalities across the country. There are still some communities that do dual stream, where you separate plastics and other recyclables from your paper. But most markets across the country that have recycling are mostly single stream markets. And so it gives the consumer the ability to really maximize the recyclables. But at the same time, there also isn't a lot of education to the consumer about what is recyclable and what isn't recyclable, and what's available in their market. So certain markets, there's no homogeneous processing capability on a national scale. So certain markets are able to process certain materials, and certain markets are not able to process certain material. For example, polypropylene is a good example of that. So there's different thresholds for recycling in different areas of the country that makes it a challenge as well. So then, it kind of segues into the processing capabilities. Do we have processing capabilities? Are those MRFs equipped to be able to capture the materials that are coming through the waste stream? And as the packaging industry changes, how quickly can we adapt from a facility perspective to be able to capture those materials more effectively? And then lastly, is there a processor? Is there an end market, a purchaser of this material that's going to be able to really collect it, aggregate it, and then make it profitable and create an economy of scale around those different kinds of materials that are now being introduced into our manufacturing and packaging and product stream? So one of the biggest challenges, I think, is really, again, understanding and having that dialogue between the packaging design and the processing capability. So when you have multi-layers or flex packaging or things like that, that really creates a lot of challenges from a multi-component or multi-layer piece of packaging. So our contamination rates, and this is something that is a challenge, a contamination rate within the single stream recyclable, this is sort of a national average, is about 16% of inbound tons, and it's increasing. And that's due to, a lack of consumer education, that missing dialogue between packaging design and processors. And then our contamination costs are also escalating. So if you think back to the landfill cost escalating, when we receive materials, it goes through a transfer station, and then from a transfer station it goes to a materials recovery facility if it is a recyclable material. At that materials recovery facility, we have a manual sort as well as an automated sorting line. For materials to be extracted that are not recyclable, they go through that manual sorting process, and then they have to be shipped back to a landfill to be discarded. So there are multiple effects there. You have a labor cost, you have a transportation cost initially to get it to the MRF, you have a secondary labor cost to segregate that material, you have a secondary transportation cost to get it to the landfill, and then you have an environmental cost of all of those factors, whether you're looking at the direct emissions from the actual facility that's sorting the material or the secondary from the transportation, and then also the emissions from the landfill. So there's quite a bit of impact by not having a very clean stream of recycling material coming to an end processor. So what is waste management doing? We've started a campaign called Recycle Often, Recycle Right. This is a sample poster. It's a public education outreach program. You can find a lot of information on this on our website at wm.com. This is our hopes and intents to really educate the public about what's acceptable in the waste stream, what's acceptable in a municipal solid waste stream or municipal recycling stream, so that there's a lot more clarity in terms of what kind of packaging or how to provide packaging that isn't contaminated by food waste or a flex package or so forth. So this is one of the ways that we're really trying to engage with the public to help them understand how not only does it impact the processing capability, but then also impacts the municipality's costs. So to that avail, understanding that the material stream is changing, understanding that businesses, municipalities, consumer behavior, transparency, all of those things are starting to create sort of a wave of transformation and change within the waste industry. Waste management has really tried to, change itself to be able to meet some of these new industry standards and new industry practices. So just to show a bit of difference between where we were before and where we are now, we've increased the number of materials recovery facilities. We actually just went through an acquisition late last year and purchased Green Star, which is had about 30 materials recovery facilities and integrated them into our operations as well. So we do have the largest number of material recovery facilities across the U.S. and Canada. We have shifted from being a traditional landfill and traditional collection company where we've shifted to become more of a green collection company. So we're fueling our trucks with CNG that is generated from our own landfills. So we're trying to create sort of a closed loop between what we manage and the output and how we're going about with our operations as well. So from an operational perspective, we've also invested in green technologies to be able to move waste up the value chain and create energy from waste. And I have a slide on some of our different partnerships in that arena. I'm sure that would be of interest to this group. And then also, our recycling capabilities and really kind of doing that public outreach and letting people know about recycling and how to recycle, I think has been really a key component for our transformation. So some of our technology solutions in the recycling arena, we've partnered with Garrick Facilities, which is a manufacturer of organic waste, manufacturer of organic garden products. So they create soil amendments from organic waste. And we've also working with the Peninsula Compost Group. So we do have quite a good outreach in terms of compost facilities across the country, and have a very solid footprint. And we've partnered with a lot of third-party providers as well to be able to solidify that solution for our customers. So in certain markets, in certain arenas like grocery or retail, we have quite a robust offering for diverting organic waste from the landfill and using that as either a compost byproduct or in an anaerobic digestion process where there's energy from anaerobic digestion. We also are the largest mercury waste solutions provider, so trying to keep toxic materials out of the waste stream as well. And then for some of our consumer-facing opportunities, we do have a recycle bank, which is a sort of a program that is a sort of a loyalty program. So the more you recycle, the more points you would receive. So that kind of incentivizes the public to do more recycling. We have Big Belly Solar. I'm not sure if any of you have strolled around downtown Chicago as of late, but they're everywhere. So they are solar-powered compaction waste containers. And the impact from that is that because they're compaction units instead of a standard can, they have to be emptied less frequently. The trucks have to come around less frequently. So there is an environmental benefit from that. And then they're powered off of solar energy. So that's a great thing. And then from a technology suite of solutions, we also are looking at ways of, as I mentioned, moving the waste up the value chain. And I think that this is something that really is sort of prevalent in starting that dialogue of, from an operational perspective, from the materials that we manage, that we collect, how do we recycle them right to bring them back into the supply chain, and for those materials that we cannot, how do we create the highest and best value of those materials? So that's where we're looking at different technologies. Pyrolysis is one of them, plastics pyrolysis. Another is gasification of biomass into a syngas, which can then be reprocessed into different either chemicals or energy byproducts. So there's a lot of different ways in which we're trying to enter the market, both to provide solutions here in America and in Canada, but also really starting to kind of look abroad and have more of a knowledge transfer from a global perspective as well, is to help other countries that have, waste, don't have necessarily the waste infrastructure yet to be able to provide some of these solutions as well. So just a shameless plug here about where we are as a company from our operations end and what we're ascribing to do as a waste company and really being a leader in the industry. We have our 2020 goals for sustainability, and as of 2014, we really have sort of either are on track or have exceeded our goals already. And to that end, my division specifically, we actually produce our CDP report, our carbon disclosure report for waste management, and this year we were named by the Dow Jones Sustainability Index as a CDP climate leader for the first time. So we're very proud of that accomplishment, and I think that it really speaks volumes from an operational perspective, from an internal company perspective, how we're really taking a look at how waste management can have an impact on the customers that we service, and then also on how we operate. So on the flip side of that, we also wanted to take a look at how do we help with our industry knowledge and knowing what we manage, how do we help really drive that clean stream? How do we drive the ability to impact the waste stream from the very beginning, from the start of a design phase? And so let's just take this as an example, the coffee cup. There are 4 different materials here and 4 different types of materials that create one product that ends up in the waste stream, usually combined and sometimes half full with coffee. So when you have these different impacts on one particular product or one particular container, that is really impacting how that material could be reutilized or be reprocessed. And so we wanted to be able to take a look at how things are made and how those decisions are made when a product or a package is being designed. And then have some input on that materiality and have some input on, is that material choice that you're making the best option? Is it going to be recyclable in the long run? And I think that there's a distinction between recyclable and recoverable. So you can make something of a resin or plastic resin or material that's technically recyclable. But if you add multiple components or different layers or so forth, or glues or things like that, is it going to then be recoverable in our current waste capacity from a processing capability? And then really kind of following that trajectory is something that we wanted to be involved in, and understanding that from the material choices, how then is it going to be manufactured? Where are the byproducts of that manufacturing process? Is there a way to optimize that so that there isn't a waste byproduct within that manufacturing process? And then how is that product going to be used? Is the consumer well educated on its use? Is the consumer well educated and knows about the end-of-life options for that particular product? How is it going to be collected? Who's going to collect it? Where is it going to be collected? And then ultimately, how do we optimize that process? So we announced at Sustainable Brands last year a partnership, a collaboration, with Bill McDonough and the McDonough Innovation Group. And it's really to be and to have a seat at the table in looking at design for recyclability. How can we impact that choice, that material choice, and really drive decisions that result in either a technical nutrient that can be brought into the supply chain again and again, or a biological nutrient that goes back into the earth and is able to be reprocessed in a natural way. So in that respect, we've been collaborating with Bill and his group, MBDC. We're working on a few different projects currently. And this is an innovative thing for us, in the waste industry, to really start to kind of have a seat at the table and a dialogue with product manufacturers, with CPG groups, with packaging design groups, and with the plastics processors as well. They're our customers. We bring them materials. But it's really good to get their feedback of where's the market, and where's that market shifting, and how can we plan for that shift as well. So having that insight and being able to kind of bring that back to the people that are making decisions about what eventually ends up in the waste stream has been very valuable. So ultimately, I think that for our benefit as a waste company, and as a positive trend within managing materials and managing resources, really moving towards a cradle-to-cradle model instead of a cradle-to-grave model is really what we have to be moving towards, right? With all of those different pressures, we have to be able to have a renewable opportunity to bring these materials back. And so that's where we really try to look at, this is of course Bill McDonough's model, but really having a seat in this process, and looking at it from moving from, just not only cradle to cradle for a product, but then looking at it from an economical perspective and looking at it as an economy of scale and really being a part of the circular economy. And if you look at this, the recycling sector, the reuse, the repair, the recycling sector is half of what we would consider, the circular economy. And so from us being the end processors, the ones who are at the end of the pike with the catcher's mitt, getting all of the material, it's really important for us to have that conversation at the very beginning at the design and manufacturing end. And I think that that's sort of the trend that I've seen, over the course of the past 2 years, I would say, really 18 months, I guess, that I've seen sort of a maturity in that conversation amongst manufacturers, consumer products, retailers also have a big component and have been really driving some of these changes, and then really engaging all the stakeholders along the supply chain. So that being said, I just wanted to talk a little bit about a case study in a 4-day event that we host in Phoenix every year. It's the Waste Management Phoenix Open. It's the first PGA golf tournament of the year. It's held at the end of January. And this is our 3rd year. We issued a zero waste challenge in 2011. And last year, we diverted 100% of the waste. There was no waste generated that went to landfill. And it was a progress. We used 2011 as a benchmark, and that year we hit over 90%. And then we made our incremental changes and improvements to the program. And this is really, I think, a great case study, and you can find there's videos at wm.com that you can see about the event and hear about the Zero Waste Challenge and our story there. I didn't want to take up too much time with this, but I did want to say that it is an event that we sponsor. We do have control over the venue, but there are, I think over 100,000 fans over the course of 4 days that come through this space with a lot of unpredictability. So, as they say, it's the Mardi Gras of the PGA. That's this particular event. So you can imagine the variety of people and materials that do end up coming through the facility. So, that being said, we're very cognizant of all of the different steps that it requires to really meet some zero waste initiatives. And so, starting with supply chain and understanding that all the supply choices, material choices that we make all have to have an end-of-life option. So, and all of them not landfill. So, there's all compostable materials, all recyclable materials, really bringing the education to the forefront, as you can see here, from the bins, from the signage, from the entry point. It is very much a component of the event. And I know that you're going to be having a zero waste football game here for homecoming, so I thought that this might be timely to highlight some of the things that we have done. But it was, and it has been, and this year we're doing it again, it has been a great exercise in understanding in a microcosm how we can create a zero waste community. And I think that just understanding those steps can really help create a larger scale and make it much more scalable beyond a golf event or a football game. So I did want to just wrap up with coming back to this and really kind of seeing how is this business ecosystem changed by really looking at design, materiality, and non-value output and trying to extract that non-value output. So when we do look at the resource consumption and we're taking raw materials, and that can be changed to recycled material, it can be materials that are brought back into that manufacturer's supply chain. That non-value output, if the design choices are right, there may not be a non-value output. It might be a completely closed-loop solution there where anything that is brought in is being utilized right away for the manufacturing process. From a consumer perspective and the materials that they and the products choices that they make, if they are well educated and know what they're purchasing and know how to process what they're purchasing at the end of life, it can all be brought back into the supply chain. And so then instead of a fourth arrow back into the earth from a landfill perspective, it can really be either a technical nutrient or a biological nutrient perspective. So with that, say thank you.
So now we have time for questions. I'll first check online to see if we have any questions from the audience yet. Okay. So with that, we'll take questions here from the audience.
I guess I'd like to know from your experience, what kind of research of any sort would help waste management do a maximal job in what they do?
I think from a research perspective, I was lucky enough to see the lab that you're working out of here, and I think it's great that you can evaluate compounds to understand how they are going to impact the pyrolysis process. So for us, I think, there are a few things. We want to know how these materials that we do end up handling, what's the best option for them. So if we do find that, a particular material or a particular compound has a higher value in terms of being able to produce fuel or a better grade of fuel, that type of research would be very valuable to us. Another example would be with biodegradable plastics. Having a better understanding of the the nature of biodegradable plastics. It's a very difficult thing for us to process currently because of the fact that in a materials recovery facility, it would be identified as a typical plastic, which then goes to a bale of, say, PET or HDPE, and then contaminates that bale. So having, from a research perspective, a way to help us identify materials more effectively in terms of bringing them further up the value chain or finding a way to better sort them would be most effective for us.
Thank you for that question. Any others from here? One from the from online we'll take.
An online viewer would like you to flip back to the circular economy slide. And then they also ask if you could repeat your name and give your contact information.
It's Anita Kedia, and my contact is akedia@wm.com.
Take another question here.
Well, how does waste management process, I guess, contaminants when it's dealing with water aquifers, and are they in that particular type of business or industry? Do they process that particular type of waste?
So for like wastewater treatment facilities, or for within an aquifer water? We do have a remediation group that does do. I'm not that familiar with our remediation group and their capabilities, but I do know that we do have capabilities around wastewater treatment and the ability to manage those particular wastes effectively. I wouldn't say. I don't know. I'm sorry. I'm not sure. So I don't want to give an answer that's not accurate. I would imagine, yes. I mean, I would think that there is, depending on the municipality and depending on whether we have operations there, our local office, so we're a pretty decentralized group in that sense. So we have our different municipal operations. So here, for example, we have a Illinois, Indiana operations, but each area of Illinois has different capabilities. So like I was saying, there isn't necessarily a national footprint that I would be able to say that across the country, yes, we have capabilities in that specific arena. Yes, absolutely. The question was whether waste management does any work to help contaminated aquifers. Is that? And okay, yes, we do. We have a public sector group and a community relations group that does specifically work with third parties and organizations, nonprofits, to be able to work with any sort of contamination issues. Are you asking from our operations? Oh yes, absolutely. If there is any sort of issue from our operations, absolutely. We have community relations groups, and we also have the capability from a remediation perspective to be able to handle that right away.
Sure. Okay, another question here.
Hi. Thanks for coming today. I just have a question, more interested in your take or your perspective on perhaps how the impact of waste is underestimated, particularly when it comes to carbon inventories. For instance, the university's carbon inventory, we use Clean Air, Cool Planet, and when our waste goes to a landfill, because that landfill has methane capture, it actually doesn't count against us at all. So there really isn't maybe the urgency to reduce waste on campus because it doesn't have the big impact on the carbon footprint of campus. And I'd like to get your take on that.
I think that's a good question, and I think that looking at carbon inventory and looking at Scope 3 emissions specifically, like I was saying earlier, I think that a lot of organizations have really kind of looked at their Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions first and have cataloged those and are now looking at Scope 3. And because there is methane capture at certain landfills and they are sort of discounted carbon offsets in that respect, I think that there is a challenge from that mindset. But not, when there is methane capture, there is still some methane release. And I think that it has to be that education, the mindset that, beyond it being a carbon impact, that it's a resource impact. And, by landfilling those resources, there is no opportunity to regain that resource back into a supply chain. So, I think that there has to be that shift. And I think that that's sometimes a bit of a challenge because people do look at it from a carbon inventory perspective and saying that here's my performance and this is how I'm doing and this is the reduction I've achieved, but there isn't the driver from a larger and broader perspective of how does that really play into the total system of either a material perspective or even just from a behavioral perspective.
Thank you. Another question here in the back.
Yeah, I wanted to elaborate on the shingle recycling program. I was wondering if you can elaborate on the shingle recycling program, please.
They're based out of Ohio, I believe, and we accept roof shingles and convert them into asphalt. That's as much as I know. No, I think they are based out of Ohio, and they do have a broad footprint. I don't know if it's national. It's transportation, so it's determined by cost. So depending on where you are and depending on how eager you are to recycle it, and you're willing to bear the cost of transportation, that is how recyclable it is.
Yes, and I also saw, I think there was an announcement in the News Gazette paper here in Champaign that there's a asphalt recycling center going to be opening in Urbana for those in this area who can look into that. So are there other questions online? Here, I'll get the online one.
The question from online is, does waste management support local governments in their efforts to educate program users in order to reduce single-stream contamination, and how?
Absolutely. It is very important for us as well as for our relationship with the municipality and our constituents within that municipality for us to drive education. So when we do launch a single stream program, we provide information to the consumer or to the residents. So we'll send out flyers and as well as posters like what I had shown up here earlier. And then also there's signage on the bins themselves. So for example, City of Chicago, when I received my blue bin, there was a poster on it and indicated pictorially what was acceptable and what was not. So that is our way of not only telling the resident that the program's available, but then also helping guide what should and shouldn't be in the recycling stream.
Thank you. There's another question here in the audience.
Yeah,
I'd like for you to elaborate a little more on the compressed natural gas operations of waste management. To what capacity are these operations capable of accepting, compressing natural gas, and what are the sources of that natural gas?
Our CNG programs are being run at our landfills. So our methane gas is converted to CNG, and then we have that capability at about 51 different markets right now, and growing. And so we fuel our trucks. We also have CNG fueling stations for the public as well at certain markets.
Thank you. Are there any additional questions here in the audience?
Of the companies you've worked with to become better recyclers and to process different sorts of materials than traditional, what do you think is primarily motivating them to make that change? Do you think it's primarily any sort of economic benefits that they gather, or is it their consumer that is asking for that change? So of the companies you've worked with that have decided to recycle more, what is driving them, consumer or economics?
I think it's twofold, and I think it's both. I think that from an operational perspective, diverting more, there is an economic benefit. In diverting more, as I discussed, landfill volume is going down, but the operation cost to keep a landfill running is still remaining the same. So the cost for landfilling is increasing. And so recycling has a cost benefit to it. But then also from a performance and from a leadership perspective, I think that companies really do want to be able to explain to their customers and their consumers that they are enhancing their environmental performance and that they are performing well. So there's a competitive advantage to it as well.
Could you provide some specific examples on what changes you made when you wanted to go from 90 to 100% on your zero waste events?
One good example is we worked with I'm not going to name names, but we worked with a specific vendor, a food vendor, that had a proprietary cup that they used that was not recyclable, not compostable. And for the first 2 years, they were very staid in their decision that this is something that they wanted to use and they were going to use because that was a symbol of their brand. We were able to work with them third year to explain what our goals were, to really have an open dialogue with them, help them find a manufacturer of a compostable cup that would be able to still provide them the logo, look, and feel of their traditional cup, and they went with it, and that really was a tipping point for one of the waste streams that we had more difficulty with. Some other things that we've done is this past year also we put in a beverage I guess container, I guess you would say, but it was a very large bin where and they were placed strategically throughout the event where people could empty their beverages before they had to leave the event and then dispose of the cup, whether it was recyclable or compostable cup, so that there wasn't the liquid waste also in the